Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I'm Breege Burke, the host of Chthonia podcast, and I hope those of you who watch have gotten a chance to, well, at least see that the new podcast for this week is out, which is on goddess Durga. And might be a bit surprising to some people. Hello, good afternoon, day, whatever it is, time it is. And I see Sam's on. Hello. Today I'm talking a bit about, I'm going to be talking a bit about Shakti today and the power of Shakti. You missed me this morning, yes. It's okay, we actually had an interruption this morning, and then I started recording again, but the recording's available, so you can definitely check that out if you haven't had a chance to yet. I was just saying as I've come on, that today is, there's been a number of things that have been going on. Like I said, the Durga podcast came out this morning. As always, it comes out for Patreon the day before. So those who are subscribers, pretty much at any level will get early access to that. And I covered Durga this week, which might be surprising given that I have done pretty much every other. To say every would be a gross overstatement. But that I've done many of the main forms of what we think of as Shakti or Shakti energy I've covered in this podcast, and I've covered some of them in special podcasts as well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Shakti today, and I'll talk about where this topic came from, and I do talk a little bit about it at the beginning of the Durga podcast. Maybe I spend too much time talking about it in the Durga podcast, but I've tried to kind of keep it. That podcast is a little shorter. It's probably just under an hour, probably because I have said so much about this topic in so many different podcasts over the last 2 or 3 years that I just thought, okay, I don't need to be endlessly repetitive about the same stuff. Now, before I get into the topic of today, I think just a few little Chthonia updates. I have a lot of energy that's being dedicated over to my other channel, Transition Life Coaching, which some of you watch the morning coffee live stream that I do over there. I do that every morning at 6:30. And also just working on promoting the Rouhani healing that I do now. That's a new certification, reasonably new certification. Of course, I've been doing what they call different energy healings, mostly Reiki, for the last 24 years, I guess. I took Reiki 24 years ago. And I mastered 22 years ago. So I've been doing a lot of that work, but Rouhani is something new and intense and powerful. And it is something that works in the angelic realm, which anybody who is an esoteric practitioner, a lot of times we think of angels and we think, oh, angels, I always thought it was fascinating when I was in Ireland that a lot of places, it was almost like you couldn't have a true metaphysical shop in a lot of places, but it was okay to have an angel shop. Like, angels are okay. Like, that's like within the paradigm. But angels also are still very much outside that paradigm as well. That's a separate topic. And the more that I do that kind of work, the more I'm like, wow, they're like no nonsense. They're like, they mean business. You get involved with angelic, types of energies, and they just sort of come in and it's like, okay, oh, you're working on this thing? Right, okay, so all right, well, this is the thing you have to do. Now go do it. It's not that they can't be helpful, that they can't bring peace, that they can't bring joy, but they're also, it's like whatever's stopping you, they're just kind of like, okay, you're going to, we're gonna excise this right away. Like there's no fooling around, I guess, when it comes to their energy, which I think takes some people by surprise because. If there has been something that you've not wanted to look at, it's like, oh, look, well, now you got to look at it. There it is. So Rouhani is quite intense, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think most people, the experiences with it that people have had are varied widely. But anyway, I've been spending quite a lot of energy trying to do that, and I know I've got some stuff to get together this week for some in-person sessions and informational sessions that I'm doing in person. Now it's going to be more at the end of the month, which is fine. It gives a little time and a little breather for that. But on the Chthonia side of the house, obviously the new podcast came out. I did have a special podcast this week for my patrons, and I'm trying to remember. exactly what it was that what it was on. It related somewhat to this topic that we're talking about today, but it wasn't specifically on Shakti. It was a little bit around, it covered like a number of different things that were related to Varahi and Varahi Puja or Varahi Navaratri, which is something that's going on right now, and that's kind of going to be the context for where I'm going with this subject today. So I did manage to get that out last week to Patreon, and for those who have been anxious for me to put up the new, to remaster and put up the ones that I've taken down, I'm probably going to try to get to some of that this week. I want to start with, which ones, like the big ones, Medusa, Lilith, Persephone, Hecate, and Hecate's got 2 parts, and then Kali. Those all had been taken down because of the different complaints about them. So now I'm going to do the remastering and put those back up. Morrigan I would like to put back up to the interview I did with April Shaley, but I may have to ask my friend to to help me, because that one was just that might be beyond my audio editing capabilities. But my friend Jesse from Podcast 1289 has offered. He said, "Oh, if you want to send it to me, I'll see if I can clean it up over on my end." Because he has said he did initially try to help me with the cleanup of it, but he said, "Well, I may have some additional tools that so that one in particular." The other ones, I think I have the tools that I need to do it, and of course, I appreciate that he does that. I followed their podcast for a long time, Podcast 1289, True Crime Movie Club, and then recently Unknown Horizons, and I've been a guest on some of those as well. So and Jesse was somebody who the way I know him is through mainly Weird New Jersey magazine, which I've been a contributor to. And he has also been a contributor to, and I know that his first true crime book came out in conjunction with Mark Moran of Weird New Jersey. So we kind of have that New Jersey, Weird New Jersey kind of connection. I've never met Jesse in person, but we talk a lot, and he's a really good guy. So so I've supported their podcast for a lot of years. So so he has occasionally come in and said, "Oh, hey, I can help you with this or that." And he's the one who had advised me on equipment initially when I started Chthonia. So anyway, we'll hopefully get some of that work done. I've also got some editorial work I'm doing for somebody that I would like to finish up this week, so I can, at least this part of it, somebody's book that I'm helping them with that has a lot to do with, the Earth Mother and things like that. And it is sort of maybe a fairy tale kind of allegory of certain things that have been going on. That's oversimplifying the plot, like big time. So, but in any case, because there's a lot of symbolism in it, she asked me if I would read through the text for her. So that's something I'm doing as a paid editorial project. And again, of course, like I said, the Chthonia Books has had 2 new releases in the last couple months, and this month I will be getting the Cunning Person's Poetry Apothecary by Ellen Jones. That will be coming out this month. I've already got the metadata submitted to Ingram, and I've got the cover template that I need for the book itself, and she's already sent me all the things I need to put all of that together. I just have to sit down and do it. It's amazing, because you think, oh, it's just this one thing and I'll just get it done, but you realize you have so many other things going on. I have 2 channels, I have 2 Instagram accounts, I live stream in 2 places, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I have all this other stuff that I have to do, and when you're trying to maintain a business, and especially right now when I have no teaching going on, because they don't let us teach in the summers anymore if you're a part-timer, then it's just kind of like just trying to busy, yeah. And it just and this is it. And a lot of stuff I spend a lot of time on is all like free stuff, and I'm kind of like, okay, I have to kind of balance that with the stuff that I need to do to actually make an income to pay the mortgage and stuff too. So so it's been an interesting challenge trying to kind of refigure all of this for myself and do this in a different way, because I had certain backup sources in the past. I don't really have those anymore, so now I have to figure out there's been a restructuring of priorities, I guess is the way you could put it. Those I've talked a little bit about this on the transition life coaching side of things, that I'm also finally realizing I'm eligible for a European passport. So now I'm in the process of trying to get that, because everybody who knows me knows I've been wanting to move overseas forever. Now, of course, an EU passport is not going to help me in the UK, which does not, is just no longer part of the EU. But, at the very least, it still gives me a whole lot of options for moving. And of course, Ireland is one of them. So, so we'll see how all that goes. As that develops, I'll have to let you know. But so a lot of stuff going on. I would like to get back to some of my own writing, but I have a feeling that might not be till fall. I know I have a couple titles I've been thinking about producing, but they need to be edited, so that may be pushed back, and that actually might be fine. I mean, Chthonia Books is not, it's just me, again, it's just one of my imprints, and I don't want to, it's to have one thing come out after another. People haven't had time to digest the one, never mind the rest of them. So spreading them out a little bit, I think, is probably a better plan overall. And we'll see. And I know people have been encouraging me to write some work that's kind of outside of that, some other nonfiction work. Still don't know what's going on with the Phantom Queen book that Theon is putting out. It seems to me that I'm not seeing a whole lot of new stuff on their publishing schedule, although I know that they have several things lined up, even before my book, that are supposed to come out. And some of them I think were supposed to come out at the end of last year. So I don't know. There just seems to be some, things seem to be taking maybe longer than they expected. So we'll see. Like I said, when I have any news on the Morrigan book, I will certainly let people know how that comes together. So, okay, so that actually might be a good little segue into talking about the topic of today, which has to do with Shakti, which the concept of Shakti. And also, but as I was thinking about this concept today for what I want to talk about, how it connects with sovereignty goddesses. Maybe it is obvious to some people what the connection is, but when we tend to think of Eastern belief versus Western belief, and maybe to put that more broadly, what we think of as Near East, Mesopotamia, Saudi Arabia, Northern Africa, things like that, like, Egypt and places like that, Greece, Rome, and then Europe and the European continent. We tend to kind of construe all of that as quote unquote the West. When you start moving into Southeast Asia and certain Asian countries, when you're talking about China, Japan, India, Nepal, places like that, then we're talking more about belief structures that might be Eastern in their inflection. So we tend to, geographically kind of map things that are Asian versus European, maybe, kind of including that little crescent there around the Mediterranean and so forth as being part of that in terms of cultural influence and where cultural influence seemed to spread. And as I've mentioned a number of times, the Western, quasi-European, European-ish, realm that we're talking about tends to view, as I've said there, it tends to have a mythology of the feminine that is passive. Although, again, as I pointed out, we also see this in Taoism, which of course is more Chinese in its inflection. And Taoism has this idea of yin or passivity, feminine, being the feminine principle, as being the passive principle. When we look to Hinduism, when we look to India in particular, and to that way of thinking, we don't see a passive feminine. We see an active feminine. Okay? The active creative principle of the universe is female. Or it's construed of as feminine. It's portrayed as a feminine goddess. Now, of course, this is a female that acts interdependently with a male principle, which is often identified with Shiva in one of his forms. Okay? So when we talk about Shakti today, what I want to talk about is Shakti, not necessarily in her form as Parvati, because we see Parvati Shiva, we see the Shiva Shakti or Shakti Shiva. Parvati, of course, is considered to be a reincarnation of Shakti, who is initially, she is one of the, she's one of the daughters of one of the progenitors of the world, and when she has a falling out with her father over her love of Shiva. And she ends up marrying Shiva, and of course he sees Shiva as like this unwashed, unruly kind of, chaotic kind of force. And his daughter, of course, is very beautiful and has a lot of potential suitors, but she chooses Shiva, and he appears to accept, she throws the garland that is the marriage garland, because she has all these suitors and she's supposed to give it to somebody, but she just kind of throws it in the air and makes a wish, and he shows up and it lands on his neck. So yeah, so he ends up becoming her spouse. And of course Shiva has sort of two forms there. We have the Ishvara form, and we have more the Rudra form. Now again, there's many names for Shiva. He's known as Maheshwara, the great god. And we also, like I said, Rudra tends to be his more, his less benign form, maybe connected more to Bhairava, and Ishvara is more the idea. It ends up connecting in some sects of Hinduism as this idea of a supreme god. Okay, and the thing is, it's not. I mean, there's really. I guess there are certain sects of Hinduism that try to talk about things in terms that sound a little more monotheistic. And Ishvara might be the name that we see connected with that. But Ishvara has a lot of different meanings, and it's actually a term that has to do with creating. Like Ish, the term Ish is like to be able to do something, something that is able. And typically Ishvara is one who is able to bestow boons on others. Who is able to give gifts, to be able to give something that is beautiful, to bestow something. That's sort of the generalish meaning of that term. And oftentimes we, at least one version of the trident of Shiva that he holds, the three prongs, there is at least one of them. Let me see if I have the way that I have that construed. Just looking at this. Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Just I'm getting all my names that I have here. It was Ishvara, Purusha, and Prakriti. Okay, my mind was going somewhere else, and I'm like, I made a few notes on this just because I don't want to mess it up. Purusha has to do with consciousness, and Prakriti has to do with nature, with the manifestation of nature. And so Ishvara is considered the other. So at least one version, and mind you, there's multiple versions of what the three prongs of Shiva's trident stands for. That's one of them. One of them is the idea that we have this idea of Ishvara, that which is able, that which creates this thing that bestows beauty, along with the principle of consciousness and the principle of nature, kind of all together. And we also see this in Goddess Durga, who I talk about in the podcast this week, when she has her trident. This is a trident given to her. Her weapons come from Vishnu and Shiva, and that is one of the weapons that we see. And this has to do with this consciousness. And we think about Shiva and Shakti as kind of interactive with each other. And this is often portrayed in a sexual way, which is why a lot of Tantra has this kind of sexual imagery, because the idea is that in terms of the human consciousness and our and the way in which that what we'll call the divine consciousness is manifest in in the body, we think of Shakti as connected with the Muladhara chakra, which is in the root. That's at the base of the spine, in the area that we would think of as being connected to not only the sex organs, but also anything that roots us to the earth. Okay, the feet downward, this is all part of Muladhara. It's part of that root. Whereas Shiva tends to be identified with the Sahasrara, which is at the top of the head, what they call the crown. One might actually get a sense, and again, I don't want to make it sound as though these are part of the same system, but if we think of Kabbalah and the idea that you have Malkut, which is connected to the kingdom or the earth at the base, and you have Keter, which is also kind of construed of as the crown at the top. And one has to do with something more that's more unmanifest, and other parts of it have to do more with what's manifest in a physical sense, okay? And these are sort of you have these kinds of forces that are around it, but they are all part of a one unified thing. Like the tree of life, it's not like, oh, it's better at the top of the tree than the bottom of the tree. I mean, they're all part of the same tree. That's the idea. Everything is sacred, right? They're all part of that same system. So when we talk about Kundalini and people who try to raise their Kundalini, which again, I've said this, and I have been criticized fairly recently for it, because I know that there's people who do Kundalini activations and things like that, and they just kind of, get annoyed with me because I tell people, be very careful about those kind of activations, because you are activating like that supreme consciousness in your nervous system. You are dealing with your spinal column. So when someone activates your Shakti, you want to be doing it in a way that is safe. It's funny, I'm putting together a class. Somebody's asked me to teach Reiki classes for them. And one of the things that came up is somebody who had suggested that Reiki could be done, that you could self-initiate into Reiki, and that you could just do it yourself. There is a guy who I think does this, and I can't remember his name. Somebody who I had been at this, had talked to had said, "Oh yeah, there's this guy, and he teaches you how to self-initiate into Reiki." And let's just say I'm dubious and skeptical of self-initiations into Reiki. And not just because, I do the attunements. The reason that for the attunement has to do with lineage, okay? It has to do with lineages. It's almost like it's passed down. So whatever the initial, whatever is received initially by the first person who either founds the system or founds the philosophy or founds whatever it is, okay? In the case of when you're talking about something within a Hindu or Buddhist context, you're talking about who is the guru, okay? Who is the one who is now your guru is part of a lineage. We'll have other gurus, unless there is some kind of credential or qualifying thing where they're able to start their own lineage, okay? Or when you're talking within that system, you're also talking about reincarnations, and that makes things infinitely more complicated, because you could have had another lineage in another lifetime, in theory, or in a concurrent lifetime, if you want to think about more of a quantum view of the soul. You could have this concurrent kind of a thing. So there are people who might be proficient, even if they haven't had all of the same, initiations in this lifetime. But with Reiki, the idea of self-initiating, I don't know how effective that is. It might be, I don't know, you might be able to do something that way, but to me it's like there's the certain mantras, this is what opens you up. And it's a lineage, it's passed down in the same way that they say you shouldn't activate your own Kundalini, it should be through a lineage. And the reason is that that's kind of a protection. You have a guru who is established in this lineage of already knowing how to activate and how to work with that energy. So, and it's not something that's lightweight. Kundalini energy is very powerful. This isn't just an energy of female empowerment or sexuality. No, it's people tend to think about it in a way that it has just to do with that. But I'm like, no, your Kundalini is fundamental to your consciousness. And I unfortunately have run into people who have had their Kundalini activated and who have ended up with all kinds of problems. They've ended up in mental institutions. They've ended up with physical problems. They've ended up with paralysis. You have to be careful. You're dealing with your central nervous system here. That's why I don't like the idea that just a random person who I don't know what their credentials or their lineage is going to activate. I would never activate your Kundalini. I am not qualified. I don't care how much I am not qualified to do it. And I would never... in spite of any kind of tantric initiations that I've had, I would never do it. I'm just like, it's just not, I just wouldn't do it. But there's people who have a very different view of it, and all I can do is hope that whatever they're doing doesn't do any damage. I like to think that maybe I'm being a little overly cautious about that, but but Shakti is a very powerful thing, and it's a word that means power. It has to do with fundamental power. And in and of itself, Shakti is not good or evil, okay? It just is. It's a force. When we see it manifest in these different deities, like I talk about with the Durga podcast this week, and I think I was going to get into a little bit about why I chose to do Durga this week. She was on the list because I'd realized somehow I've done everybody but Durga, and she's kind of that central figure of the Devi Mahatmayam, so we should really talk about her. And of course, she is one that's very popularly worshipped. You don't have to be part of Shaivism or Shaktism or any of those kinds of special sects to actually be involved. Durga Navaratri is every October, and it's celebrated at every major temple. I mean, it's just in the same way that Shivaratri is celebrated, usually February-ish is usually when that is celebrated. Durga Navaratri is also, and we did actually do podcasts on the Navadurgas. So and Durga's name, as I said, was interesting because she has to do with removing difficulties. But she, as I mentioned in the title of the podcast, she also has to do with making them. Okay. Now, when we talk, so what got me on what made me decide to do this particular topic this week was that I belong to Sri Vidya Temple that's in Rush, New York. And again, as I've told people, I don't live anywhere near Rush, New York. People who, if you don't live in the U.S. or if you don't live in this area, you might think, oh, New Jersey, New York, yeah, they're right next to each other. Yeah, I mean, there's some parts of New York that are not that far. They're maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Rush, New York is up past Buffalo. It's up near Niagara Falls. So it's really far. If I was to get on a train from New York City, it would probably take me about 16 hours to get up that way. It's not, well, that's with stops and things. By car, yeah, it would still take you quite a few hours. So it's not close. However long it takes you to drive to the Canadian border, that's pretty much how far it is. So I do a lot of my work with them remotely. I sponsor pujas. I'll do sponsorships, and they will send me back the prasadam and the things, for my participation. And of course, I do watch the pujas and things. They do live stream all of them now, which is great. And I mean, some of them I see, and then they will do like Dalita Sahasranama. They will do the recitations, and if I'm able to, I will participate in the recitations on my end. And that's part of the reason they live stream, so that other people can participate. So they're having the Varahi Navaratri. Now Varahi has a special significance within Tantra that she doesn't have. I've mentioned her as one of the Ashtamatrikas. Okay, she's one of the 8 mothers, so to speak, that is connected to the to the Sri Chakra or the Sri Yantra. Excuse me. We have there's 10 Mahavidyas, and then we have the Ashtamatrikas. Sometimes there's the Septamatrikas. There's another system where there's only 7 and not 8. But and the 8th one is often interchangeably either Lakshmi or Narasimhi, interchangeably. Within the mantra that is known as the Khagamala, it's usually Lakshmi, Mahalakshmi, who is mentioned rather than Narasimhi. But a lot of these, the 8 matrikas for the most part are what you would call the Shaktis of different devas, of different gods. Many of them might be, some of them are avatars of Vishnu, like Varahi is the Shakti connected with Varaha, which is a form of Vishnu that takes the form of a boar. So she's shown with the head of a boar. And within Tantra, she is considered to be the general of Sri Lalita's army. Okay. Now, there's a repetitious story cycle that we see within Hinduism, which is you will have the demon the great Ashura. And again, we're using the term demon advisedly. I say this a lot, but I repeat myself in case there's people who haven't heard me say this before. But the term demon in Hinduism, when you refer to an Ashura, you're talking about a being that is very temporally focused or very materially focused. They're focused on what they can acquire for themselves. And typically, if they engage in spiritual practices, it's for the purpose of gaining a boon from Brahma or from Shiva. And usually that boon is something that makes them invincible or gives them power or makes them unable to be killed unless, except by some really weird thing, like, by neither male nor female nor day nor light and standing on one leg and doing this, like, there's some weird condition under which they can be killed, but otherwise they're invincible. That's something that you will see. And many of what we think of as the avatars of Vishnu are often these kind of strange forms that fulfill whatever the requirements are of slaying this particular Ashura that has gained too much power and creates a situation where things are out of balance. They're often considered to be very materially focused, but I think people have to be careful about, because the material world has its proper place. within Hinduism and also within Tantra. The idea of, the acquisition of prosperity or abundance has its place. The problem is, like anything, when anything becomes excessive, when people become greedy, when they decide, they don't care if people are starving, I'm going to take mine. When it starts to get to a point where it becomes more and more, frequently what we'll see in, like for example, in the Durga Saptashati, the 700 verses in praise of Durga, we see the appearance of Raktavera or Raktabija, who is the demon, who's the seed of desire. And what the seed of desire does, what he does is he, his boon that he's gotten for the kinds of austerities that he practiced, was that if you try to kill him, every drop of blood produces another one of him. And there are other demons that have their very similar kinds of characteristics that you will see. And of course, this really a demon like Raktabija or Raktavera is the symbol of what the material problem is. It's not enough to have your share. It's like once you have it, it's like you've tasted something that you like, and you decide you have to have more and more and more and more of it, and you never have enough of it. It's almost like the kind of psychology of addiction. The idea that you cannot help yourself. In some way, it's something you need to have. And there's all kinds of addictions. I mean, they don't just have to be things that we think of like food or alcohol or caffeine or things like, there's lots of things we could be addicted to, where we, if it comes to us losing or letting go of those things, we can't do it. Or we can't do it easily. There's a fight, okay? There's a battle. And you can also think of that kind of power as being connected to, it's like if you try, okay, let's just say you do have a particular thing. And let's not even go with alcohol. Let's go with something like somebody who's trying to go on a diet, and they say like, oh, okay, I don't want to eat as much. So a person really tries to, be very austere with their diet, which is never a great way to go. But in any case, some people do that. They say, okay, I'm going to really cut my calorie count. I'm only going to have this, this, and this. And then what happens is they wake up in the middle of the night and they eat everything in the fridge. That's kind of the Raktavera, Raktabija kind of thing. And because what it is it's just like the more you try to kill it, the worse it becomes. the more it multiplies. And so this is where you have a goddess like Kali who would come in, and she would, as the Devas attacked Raktabija, she basically drank the blood up that was along the ground. She takes her long tongue and just sucks up all the blood so that he cannot reproduce. And so, if we look at that in terms of the psychology of it, this is the Devi who is now it takes away that addiction and allows us to be clear of that attachment that keeps us in some kind of a bondage to something that we know is either we don't want to be part of, or puts us in a cycle that creates this problem or this suffering. So interesting kind of ideas. But the Shaktis appear in all of these things. Now the one of Durga, like I said, we have the Devi Mahatmayam, and we have the battle between her and Mahisha, or the Mahisashura, the great demon who usually is portrayed as a buffalo. And the image you'll show is of somebody who looks like they're half man, half buffalo, or half the way they would portray the Asuras, like as these men with kind of like these beards and these kind of, certain kinds of, they always had a certain kind of facial structure or look, the way that they were portrayed in art. But you see her taking the trident usually and just jamming it through him and slaying him. And while she's standing there with this very benevolent look on her face. And so you have this. So you have to have this now with the other goddess who tends to be one of the main representations of Shakti is Lalita Tripura Sundari, or sometimes just Tripura Sundari, or she's also known as Sadashi. Okay, and so she's actually quite central to Tantra, and she has other names too. She also can be known as Sri Radhareshwari, and she's a very potent force. Now I know I've done podcasts on all of them, but Lalita is interesting because, and I feel like with respect to Durga, there's a similar quality that they have. Now, mind you, to a certain degree, you will find that all of these devis, all of these goddesses, in some sense, they're different, but there's also a unity behind them. I mean, when the Shaktis go out to do battle in the Devi Mahatmayam, the opposing forces, the generals of the Mahisasura's army will say to Durga, they say, well, you're only winning because you have all this help. She says, no. She says, that's all me. That's all me. Those are all facets and manifestations of me. And then she pulls them all back into her to show that they're all just her. Okay? And, but these Shaktis are often considered to be the female powers that were within the Devas, within the gods. Indra has Indrani. Even Shiva has, there's Maheshwari is the Shakti. Not the wife of Shiva, but the Shakti. Narasimhi is the Shakti that is connected with Narasimha, who is the lion form of Vishnu. Varahi is connected with the boar form of Vishnu, Varaha. And she's somebody who's in the Vargatama Tantra, which is the black magic Tantra. Varahi is actually quite central to that. She's often worshipped at night. But within the context of Sri Vidya, she is the general of Lalita Devi's army. And Lalita Devi has a story connected with her that's very similar to Durga's. There is a demon called Banda, which is interesting because he gets his name from Shiva, actually, where he practices austerities, and Shiva says to him, Band, which means good. And so he gets this name Banda, but he's Banda Shura. He's another one that uses his powers to oppress and to destroy. And so Lalita comes in with her army, and she manages to destroy him. Now, even though he manages to conquer all the different Shaktis associated with the Devas, she eventually does dispatch him. So you have this idea of, so formula. You've got, Ashura that does some kind of spiritual practice, gets a boon from Brahma or Shiva, takes that boon to do bad stuff, and then usually, or stuff that is just, that is toxic and excessive. And then you have a form of the Devi who comes in and with her army of other Shaktis and vanquishes him. So it's interesting. So we have this very warlike idea. And Durga herself, Durga's never married to anybody. They're not talking about her as being necessarily a manifestation of Parvati. They're not necessarily talking about her as having a partner. In fact, anytime anyone wants to possess her, she's like, nope, you gotta defeat me in battle if you want to possess me. And of course they can't defeat her. But it's also been noted that she is also the one who creates the difficulties. She's the remover of difficulties, but she's also the creator of difficulties. And the same is true of Lalita. So this gets into a very interesting kind of way of looking at the universe and about how it's constructed. Now Lalita is often connected to what they call Adi Parashakti. Now you'll hear this, Adi Parashakti, Parashakti and Paraparashakti, and also a Parashakti. So para has to do with being in union with something, okay? So the Adi Parashakti is kind of the supreme primal consciousness that is sort of transcendent, or the Parashakti sometimes even, and the Parashiva as well. There's a Param Shiva and there's a Parashakti. They're kind of primordial. They're kind of beyond thought, beyond anything that we can comprehend. When you get to Parashakti, that is something that is kind of both transcendent and kind of manifest at the same time. There's kind of a connection. And by the time you get to a Parashakti, that actually has to do with not one who is joined, but one who is alone. Okay? So a Parashakti has to do with Maya, has to do with the visible world. And what's interesting is that, in other words, to be manifest is to be alone, which is interesting. Because it goes back to pretty much every creation mythology that says that we start in kind of a unified state and then we're separated. If I talk about, and I talk about this when I teach creation myth, Hesiod. Okay, Hesiod's mythology of the, not so much the creation of mortals, but more the creation of just the world as we know it. I mean, you have the five deities that come out of chaos, that come out of void. You have Erebus, you have Nyx, you have Tartarus, You have Gaia, and you also have Eros. These are the 5 forces that come out. And Eros, of course, is your drive or your desire. There's your creative manifest force in the midst of what is really kind of this darkness and void. And then, of course, you have Gaia, who's the Earth Mother. But she initially is coupled with Uranus, who's actually one of her children. But they kind of, Uranus is formed, and the 2 of them are made, and they produce all of these children. And among them is Kronos, who is the god of time. Okay. And but they also produce all of these monsters and other things. And of course, Uranus hates his children, so he keeps trying to make them disappear, stuff them back in the earth. And which really upsets Gaia, because, who wants that? And so she asks her children, who's going to help me against your father? And Kronos says, yeah, I'll do it. And so he gets the sickle, which interestingly is kind of, a sickle is something that almost has a moon shape to it. And the moon actually also kind of figures into this too. So he takes the sickle, and then he castrates his father. And once he does that, then now earth and sky are now separate. Okay, now you are in a place where life can happen because you have separation. And that's the weird paradox that there's this creation that goes on. Or if we think about Gnosticism, of the idea of things being created in pairs, and this world being created by a single deity called Yaldabaoth, right? Or one that thinks he's the only one. Okay, so that's another inflection, another way of looking at it, right? If we look at the Genesis story, again, everybody's in the Garden of Eden, they're all together, humans are there with God, and blah, blah, blah. And then they eat of the fruit, and what happens? Separation occurs. They know that they're different, and therefore they're rejected from the garden, because you can't stay in that unified space outside of time. It throws you into the field of time, and it throws you into the field of death. So to be in that is to be alone, okay? It's the idea that you're not united with those forces that we think about when we think about the Paramatman, or we think about Parashakti. You're not united with it. You're separated from those, and that's the visible world. That's the world that we live in. But then this gets into the idea of Shakti as Mahamaya, because Durga is described as Mahamaya, and so is Lalita. Okay. And again, there's other, Mahamaya is also talked about in her own right, and so on and so forth. What's Mahamaya? The great illusion. Because it's a different construct. As I mentioned, the Western construct focuses on what Campbell calls the insight of duality, the fact that we are separate. The Eastern view, or at least that Hindu view, talks about the insight that transcends duality. So in other words, instead of saying we're in this world and we're subject to death, and then of course then you have these other ideas like about Christ coming in later on and conquering death and stuff like that. Instead of that, you have more of this idea that you perceive yourself as separate, but that's just Mahamaya. Because beyond that, the primal consciousness really isn't a Parashakti. It's actually there is actually a unity beyond it, but Mahamaya, and usually it's shown as Lalita. Lalita supposedly creates Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, or Shiva in his 2 forms of Ishvara and Rudra, just by looking and just by thinking about it. She makes the 3 of them. They are all beholden to her. She's the supreme. She is beyond them. She's the supreme, beyond what we tend to think of as the creator, the destroyer, the preserver, and the destroyer in Hinduism. Okay, so Lalita is beyond that, and she's beyond all of the devas, because but the thing is, her name is Lalita. Okay, so Lalita, in that is there's a root word in there, lila, which in the Sanskrit language it has to do with play, it has to do with playfulness. So the way that this was conceived is that basically creation is the sport of the Devi. Okay, so everything that's created is actually just her playing around. And that goes back to the ideas that we will see, like if you listen to a lot of Alan Watts, like I have over many years, is he will talk about the fact that in the Western world, we tend to look at, he talks about 2 models of the universe that we tend to look at in the West. We have the ceramic model and the fully automatic model is what he talks about. And really, this is almost like what you could call the religion and science thing. The ceramic model says that things are created, that there's a creator, that someone was there and he made all of this, right? And that within the ceramic model, you have the idea that of the one who supremely creates is also like the supreme lawgiver. So he had mentioned the fact that Protestant churches, at least initially, like the ones you would see, look like courtrooms, because there's this idea of God as sort of like benevolent judge, right? So it's almost a monarchical system. God is king and God is judge, right? And we see that. We can see that reflected in mythologies of Zeus, Jupiter, well, even technically Indra. Although Indra is a little, it doesn't quite exactly neatly dovetail with the other ones. But you do have this idea of a god king, right? And so you have this. That's one model. Then what he talks about is the fully automatic model. He says it's basically identical to the other one, because it still has this idea that there are laws that govern the universe. There's laws that create order. Only they just take the creator and throw him out. They're like, yeah, we don't need that. This is all just fully functioning, and it's all just ordered, and there are laws of physics and laws of this and laws of that. There's laws that govern how things are. We determine that this is the way things always happen. These are the causal effects. This is how it happens. Okay? It's just one says it's just all happened by accident, or happened from, I don't know, from a big bang, or from whatever else we want. The other one says, and they're really basically the same model. It's just one has God in it and one doesn't. And what Alan Watts would say, he's like, I'm not sure either model really has it right. Because he talks about that third model. He says the Eastern model, which is the model of play. It's the idea that you are playing a role, you are acting. Because we tend to look at the separation of things, and separation is what brings suffering. It was interesting. Most things that people deal with when it comes to what causes your suffering, if you get down to what the root causes of your suffering, it's either something to do with isolation, or it's something to do with like lack of security. It could be financial security or something like that. But there's the sense of being alone and unsupported in some way, whether this means I'm not accepted by a certain social group, whether it means you feel rejected by your family, whether it means rejection by a partner or a spouse or something like that, whether it means you are, whatever it is, a lot of the issues that we have, or we're trying to do something by ourselves and we need help, and we may be frustrated because we feel like we're not helped, or we're not understood, or we're not. You think about all of the things that, everything's great except there's a disharmony over here, or there's a disharmony over there. And who is it with? And even to a certain degree, feeling financially unstable is also a form of being unsupported, because there isn't anyone, you might not feel there's anyone you can go to for help in that kind of a setup, right? You're on your own. And so when we talk when we talk a lot about individuality and doing things on your own and finding your authentic path, it's kind of a sense of trying to get past, in some ways, that's kind of the heroic myth that says, okay, we blaze our own trail. But we do it in a way where we have to, it's sort of like we have to figure out the resources we have on our own. But really, at the end of those myths, we rejoin the community in the end. Ultimately, there's some kind of a reconnection with the community. There's a certain amount that you do on your own, and then there's a certain amount that you do in the group and with the community. So when we look at Eastern belief, or let's just say Hindu belief, because it's not all Eastern belief, you have this idea that you are, that the world is an illusion, that the separation that you experience, so what really upsets you and causes you difficulty is the illusion of separateness. It's the idea that, you're not really attached, that you're alone, that you're alienated, you're in your bubble, nobody understands you, or you try to find your tribe in your group, but even your group might be isolated from other people. Tribalism sure as heck is a thing today. No matter what you identify with politically, socially, culturally, whatever, that we definitely have, there's definitely an atmosphere these days of, if you're not with us, you're against us. And to kind of live in this kind of a thing. The thing is, ideally, when a society becomes more diverse, again, going back to the Roman Empire and the diversity of that, ideally a place like the United States, which is secular, because there's so many different people from so many different backgrounds. It's not like there's just, one. It's not like, oh, we're one city and we all have one church and follow one this and one that. Everything's different. And so the idea is that you have to keep things flexible enough so that people can kind of do their own thing. People are also influenced by each other's ideas. This is what they call syncretism. It's where you, as you get exposed to people from different cultures and see their religions or see their philosophies or ideas, you listen to that and we find that they become integrated with the things that we do. And that's kind of part of it. It's the idea that the more you're exposed to, the more influences are going to come in, the less isolated you are, and maybe the more options you have compared to maybe what you experienced maybe when you were younger, or maybe just in a particular community. So we have this kind of a thing, but the idea that we are separate is from this point of view an illusion. So the goddess that creates the illusion is also the goddess who dispels it. And what was said about Durga is the fact that because she is somebody, she's the creator of difficulties, and because she has all of these, like we hear this about the Matrikas too, the idea that all the Shaktis also have qualities about them. It could be envy, it could be rage, it could be something. There's something about them. Like in one sense, Durga can represent that violent impulse, that impulse to fight back. But she's also the one who takes it away. So there's the weird paradox there of the Devi, of the Shakti, is that she both creates and destroys, and in either case it doesn't matter because it's all just the play. Think about how I think about that when I think about how seriously we take sport in this culture, or how seriously you might take games, like if you're somebody's into role-playing games or virtual reality or gaming generally speaking. Think about how many we always tend to think of games as a distraction, and I'm like, well, no, it's kind of like an extension, really. The seriousness with which we play games, or which we might take, a sports team seriously or something like that. The way people can get really as impassioned about that as they can about other aspects of their life, or maybe even more so. For some people that's like a substitute. People who are into really enjoy like fantasy leagues and stats and things, and that. It's kind of like you're just like world building. It's like you're almost creating another kind of reality based around sport. And in a way that it's like a weird reflection or a microcosm of the way everything else actually is. But the problem comes in, when you forget what you're playing. Now, in theory, the idea is that you play a multiplicity of roles. Your various lifetimes are supposed to be the different roles that you play. And the thing is, you have to remember that you're playing a role. Like this is a bit of the philosophy behind even Zen Buddhism, or the way that one approaches something in a Zen way, is that it's almost like you're in a role playing game. It's like, okay, we're going to go along, and here's this thing that comes, and then we kind of roll the dice and see what's going to happen one way or the other. There's an element of chance to it, but it's based fundamentally on the idea that the order of things, the way that we see things, is actually illusory, and the reality of things potentially is a lot more chaotic. It's just that, but because you have a Devi, you have Lalita she's generally considered to be benign or beneficent in her own way, but she's also tricky. So, like I said, she can create a situation. A lot of times, it's not only her. You see this happening with the gods. They create situations where what we think of as the villainous characters, in a construct that thinks of it as good versus evil. And sometimes I've seen this constructed this way. I've seen them say like, oh, well, Durga's there to battle evil. Kali's there to battle evil. Well, kind of, but it's not that cut and dried. This isn't a battle of good and evil necessarily. Even though we may look at what the armies of the Asuras, what they represent, you may say, oh, well, those are all things that maybe we consider to be bad for us, right? We live in a context that talks about sin, right, and sinfulness. But this isn't about sin. That's not really the conception here. It's like you could end up in these particular scenarios. You could be the villain. You could be, the villain could be created. The villain might start out as one who's actually doing all of the right ethical things. but then becomes this villain. And then the question is, okay, now you've got this villain. Now the challenge is you've got to take this villain down. Now, I connected this with sovereignty goddesses, and also if you think about forces like the Furies, okay? I think about this because obviously, like I said, I have a book on the Morrigan, which has still to come out. But one of the things about Morrigan and other sovereignty goddesses like her, okay? When you talk about a being that has to do with sovereignty, what is sovereignty about? Okay, first of all, it has to do with freedom. Okay, and one of the things that's said about both Lalita and Durga again is the fact that they're the playfulness or the tricksterish nature of them is a representation of their freedom. They can do what they want. They're free, right? What do we connect sovereignty with? Freedom. Okay, so what happens when we deal with a sovereignty goddess? Let's take a goddess like Morrigan. So what are her different aspects? Macha. Okay, Macha means basically field, plain or field. Like it's like usually a cow pasture is kind of what that means. And she becomes a representation of the land itself, and the land in terms of what it may produce. Like I said, land for livestock grazing, or land for the way in which cattle and so forth were considered to be valuable property in ancient Ireland, particularly. So you have this idea of sovereignty. So when one is sovereign over an area, it's like, okay, we've taken ownership of the land to some degree. Whether you retain that ownership or not, how do you retain ownership? Frequently, if people challenge your ownership, is you go to battle. Okay, so sovereignty it's freedom. It's about prosperity and being able to prosper and have the abundance of the land, and also being able to set the rules and the boundaries for that land, which is also part of what Morrigan does. When she shows up in her prophetic form, whether it's as the washerwoman at the ford, whether it's the Bove, or whether it's Nevin, whatever manifestation she has, or when she shows up as an old hag, or she shows up as something and she threatens somebody and said, you violated this taboo, basically, and this terrible thing's going to happen to you now. When she shows up and does that, she tends to be, and then she also shows up on the battlefield. Okay, so when she comes onto the battlefield, she is, when she comes in there, she's coming in and she's encouraging one or the other side. She's decided who's going to have the sovereignty, and that's the side that she will work her magic for. Okay, in the crow form that she has. And in some cases, when people push, when certain heroes like Cuchulainn push back against her, then she goes at them and she makes their lives difficult too. She creates those challenges. She puts them in positions of violating taboos. So there's a similarity there. This is the goddess who gives abundance, and she's also the one who can destroy it. Okay? So it's almost like this is the goddess who sets what the boundaries are. She's the queen of everything. And yes, there are these individual kings and there's these devas and there's different, but she is the one who sets the boundaries. And when you have, regardless of whether it's a deva, whether it's an ashura, when somebody tries to test that sovereignty or test the boundary, that's when the war starts. That's when she comes in and says, nope, I'm fighting, I'm clearing you out because I am the one with the freedom. I'm the sovereign one. I'm the one that gets to decide. And what's interesting is when we look at patriarchal society, a lot of it has to do with the ways in which we, in which there is this force that wants to conquer or wants to be the one to set the boundary. Okay, it's very, it ends up being kind of a very masculine dominated thing. And the way that we dominate it is through, our ways of ordering, our rationality, our mathematics, our, the military things, the way we do weapons of war. Although I've argued again that military is feminine in its own way as well. But we have this idea, this kind of ordering principle that we have, and the ordering principle is connected to consciousness, right? I mean, this is the even there's Purusha. This has to do with Shiva, right? It has to do with consciousness. And then, but the consciousness connected with the nature, that's what manifests. That's what manifests the living world as we have it. And the problem comes in when we start to kind of privilege that, and we tend to forget about the other piece of it. It's part of that condition of separation that we have, where we think that, that we are separate, and that what we have in our head and what we can see with our eyes is all that there is. Okay? And these are the forces that end up coming in, these forces of consciousness that reset the balance, that set you right and go, no, this is an illusion. And that's why goddesses like Kali are said to bring clarity of vision, because they're saying, they're taking away the illusion. They're saying, hey, we're taking away the thing that has been blinding you and has been making you miserable. It's like, but she lets you be miserable for a period of time, and then they take it away. So anyway, there was one other thing I did want to talk about in connection with Shakti, and that has to do with, okay, we talked about Lalita Tripura Sundari as Sodashi, okay, number 16. Now, that's literally what that means. It's number 16, is Sodashi. And so what does that mean? Now, I'm just going to share this with you. And this is a book that I've if you've listened to the earlier podcast that I've shared with, this is David Kinsley's Tantric Visions of the Divine Feminine, the 10 Mahavidyas. And when he talks about Tripura Sundari, he talks about a 17th century story. Okay, now 17th century is quite late. Okay, that's relatively speaking, a lot of deity worship came about. I think they were saying probably around the Middle Ages. There was a whole period of Indian history where the devas were not really strictly part of Hinduism, where they weren't certainly in the forefront. And by the time we get to the Middle Ages, that's when you start seeing more of the references. You start seeing more of these texts appear. So here's the story as it was told. Okay, he says, in the Pranatoshini, probably written in Bengal in the 17th century, we're told that once upon a time Shiva referred to Kali by her name in front of some heavenly damsels who had come to visit, calling her Kali, Kali, which they're translating as Blackie, Blackie. Okay, mind you, when I talk about this in the podcast, I'm like, ooh, there's almost a distinctly racist thing to this, but it's not what it appears. So let's see. Which she took to be a slur against her dark complexion. She left Shiva and resolved to rid herself of her dark complexion through asceticism. Now, I think this is an interesting story to pop up in the 17th century, especially in light of when you start to have colonialism impinging on India, or when you have the first missionaries visiting, or things like that. I don't know. I find it a little bit interesting. Anyway, later the sage Narada visited Kailasa, and seeing Shiva alone, asked where his wife was. Shiva complained that she had abandoned him and vanished. With his yogic powers, Narada discovered Kali living north of Mount Sumeru and went there to see if he could convince her to return to Shiva. He told her that Shiva was thinking of marrying another goddess and that she should return at once to prevent this. Okay, so he's playing a game. By now, Kali had rid herself of her dark complexion but did not realize it. Arriving in the presence of Shiva, she saw a reflection of herself with a light complexion in Shiva's heart. Thinking this was another goddess, she became jealous and angry. Shiva advised her to look more carefully and with the eye of knowledge, telling her what she saw in his heart was herself. The story ends with Shiva saying to the transformed Kali, as you have assumed a very beautiful form, beautiful in the three worlds, the name will be Tripura Sundari. You shall always remain 16 years old and be called by the name Sodashi. Now, interestingly, by our modern conventions, everything is wrong with that story. From maligning her for a dark complexion, and her feeling that that's a problem, to seeing her forever as a 16-year-old. There's a lot of problems with that on the surface, okay? But typically with mythology, what we see on the surface is not always what it is. Although, again, I do often think about that story and how late it is, and I do wonder if there is, given how we will often see certain cultures privilege white skins and white complexions, even when that is not what is normative within their own culture. That is only something I've found rather dismaying. The idea, like I remember I had a friend who lived in Dubai. I'd met my friend's daughter, and she says, oh, you should come to Dubai and work. And I'm like, well, I have no reason, I can't think of any reason why I want to go to Dubai and do that. She's like, oh no, she goes, you're a white American, you'll have no problem. She goes, it's just the natives, they don't want them, they don't care about them. I'm like, well, that's not really cool. That's actually really horrible. I don't like the idea that, oh, because I'm a white person and that somehow that makes me like better for something, because it sure as heck doesn't. But yeah, there's kind of this mindset about that. However, this story, as I've indicated, especially the number 16, okay, there's something that they call the Paksha. There is the Shukra Paksha and there's Krishna Paksha. And this has to do with the phases of the moon. And that's what this is actually a reference to. If we take that gloss off of it, what it's talking about is the idea that you have the dark phases of the moon and you have the light phases of the moon. So, in other words, for Shiva to refer to her as being Kali or dark means that she's moved into the darker phases of the moon. And so when she goes away, it's that period of time, before Purnima, which is the full moon in Hinduism, and then where she becomes lighter. So she's darker and then she's lighter. Has to do with the moon. So Dashi is actually that point, the day 16, because usually they're split, the two of them are split. There is, and that would be considered, the full moon would be on the 15th day. So if she's 16, she represents that 16th day where she still has all the qualities of the full moon, but we also see that kind of foot into the darker part, the Krishna Paksha, the darker part of that cycle. So when we see this kind of references, when we think of Lalita Triyapura Sundari as being Sodashi, as the one on the 16th day, it's that point where you're still having kind of that potency of the Purnima, but you still have that element of the dark that we're about to move into, which hasn't fully manifested itself yet. But to me, it's almost suggestive of the fact that she has a nature that is both and neither part of what we think of as the dark and light sides of the cycle, or the one that has to do with increase and the one that has to do with decrease. Okay, kind of have these two sides that come about. And that's really what that's a reference to. So when they say she is Sodashi, she's forever the one who's, between the fullness and the decrease. And there's lots more that could be said about it. But again, I do have the podcasts that I've done on that, the podcasts that I've done on the Sri Chakra. And there's a lot within the mantras and the systems of Tantra, and it's particularly the worship of the Sri Chakra, that you could go on endlessly into a lot of the symbolism there. But and it's funny because there's also disagreements that I find about who should recite certain mantras and things. Like I was looking up something on the Devi Khadgamala, what they call stotra, but it's really a mantra, and it's got 15 parts. And the idea is that 5 of them are for Shiva, 5 are for Shakti, and 5 are for them unified. But again, it's that idea of those phases between the new moon or the Purnima or the full moon. The two different from one end to the other. And I can't remember what the word is for full moon, for new moon. But it's about these different. So that becomes sort of combined in with it as well. And of course, what does the moon have to do with? Well, the moon was now we use the sun to measure time. Our days are 24 hours. They're based on solar cycles. Equinoxes, solstices, things like that. But earlier calendars were based on the moon. And in fact, a lot of the Vedic astrology and so forth is also lunar based. Okay, you have the idea of the nakshatras, the 27 lunar mansions, and you have so then there's has a lot to do with your where your lagna is your ascendant, and then you of course have the the rashi. You have the influence of the moon, and the time you were born is the most important thing, not your sun sign. Sun is that's part of a much more westernized idea of astrology, or has to do with tropical astrology. So we have this moon, but moon is a way of counting time. But from new moon to full moon, from full moon to the dark of the moon again, and then the moon cycles around again. You see it pointing, the crescent pointing east, it gets full, then it points west, and then it goes. It follows a cycle. So it's a way of measuring time. So to call her Sodashi, she's almost like she's right in the middle of that cycle of time. And the cycle of time is really we've talked about the arrow of time, and how the arrow of time is really, that's illusory too. The idea of past, present, future moving in this linear progression is the way that we perceive things, but that's also part of Maya. So it's almost like she's the one who's the Maya of time, in a way. So interesting symbolism there. But ultimately, we are talking about Shakti as a force in and of herself, as being connected to at least this particular, the ways that we see these goddesses having to do with the manifest world, and the fact that that manifestation has something illusory to it. It is the play of the goddess. And even our conceptions of time and everything are part of that play. And so it suggests a way of life or a way of living that takes us back from that says, okay, look at the world as play. You're playing a game, and when your life is nothing but suffering, you've started to take this game a little too seriously. Step back and try to see what the reality is. Not that that's easy for us to do, because as much as we privilege our rationality and our consciousness, really the difficulty that we have is that we never can totally conceive reality. But on the other hand, as I explained when I talk about the Vishvarupa, maybe you don't really want to perceive that reality. That's I talk about that in the Durga podcast, the Vishvarupa. We talk about Krishna as Vishvarupa appearing in front of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. And then there's another where the gods say, they say to the deity, we want to see you in your form. They say to Durga, we want to see you in your form that is the Vishvarupa. And I have what has tried to be a conception of this on my Patreon. It's one of the images I have, but I also put it into the video this week. And it's basically this terrifying woman with like thousands of heads and all this, and who is slowly devouring the universe. And it's like, they're like, never mind, can you just come back and be gentle again? And it's interesting because one of the conceptions that at least one of the analyses I've seen of that is that the idea that, we want to deal with the feminine if it's in the form that's benign, that we can, that we feel we can manage. We don't like the tricky forms. We don't like the forms that create the difficulties, but you also don't, but that's part of the paradox, is that life exists because of those difficulties. It's part of the game, or how did Joseph Campbell used to say, it's an opera, but it hurts, something like that. It's this great thing that we're participating in, and that the key to being in life and enjoy is recognizing that you're playing a game, okay, and to have fun with it. A lot of times we don't, and again, recognizing that there's wounding and there's things that hurt there, and if you look at it from an ethical standpoint. This is why I often talk too about how modern Western religion is ethical. We always talk about what's good and what's evil, and this is good and this is bad. It's not about what's good and bad. It's about what is. About what is. And what is at least subjectively speaking, a combination of good and bad. There's going to be times when we're hurt and we're wounded and we're down and we're empty and scared, and then there's going to be times when that's not going to be the case. And the question is, how do we work through that? How do we negotiate that? How do we play the game? So interesting discussion of Shakti, and also I guess kind of interesting, but also interesting to see how these stories, the inflections of them. They're still kind of telling the same truths, but the way that they develop as we move into a time period where colonial perceptions might even be seeping into things, but nonetheless, you still have the kind of reality beyond that. And of course, people who are initiates are going to have an even more esoteric view of what all of that means. But yeah, it's for me personally, and this is just my personal opinion, okay? Not something I expect anybody else to pick up. But I just always have felt like when people have always asked me, no matter where I go, people will say, oh, you're a religion professor, so what religion do you think is the best, or what? Who knows? That's extremely subjective, right? And I said, if I was going to pick a religion that actually characterizes life as it is, I said I'd have to say it was Hinduism. And anybody who I talk to who's Hindu, they look at me and they go, really? You really think that? And I said, yeah, I really think that. Because it demonstrates the deities and the deities and the devas, they represent the complexity of the way of our reality, not just our physical reality, but our mental reality, our emotional reality, our spiritual reality. It's complicated and this really, I feel like it's something that whether you want to think of it as a metaphor and allegory, or whether you want to think of it as somehow representing forces that actually are. But anytime you tell it in story or paint it in picture, it's never going to be quite what it is, because there's an element of it that's beyond thought. And so when you see gods with like 3 eyes and 10 arms, and it's because they're not like us too. They're also trying to make the point Like, you don't want to look at Shiva and Shakti like a man and a woman. They're not, even though men and women, or humans, contain Shiva Shakti elements in them, it's not like you're looking at, we always try to, that's the other thing too, we try to always interpret myth in a real social thing, like, what the relationship between the gods is like. I'm like, relationships between gods have nothing to do with human relationships. They are not going to behave in the same way. Like, a lot of my Morrigan Timelines novel is based on that idea. She behaves in weird and crazy and ways that people find sometimes offensive because she's not a human. And she doesn't have to behave like one. And that's kind of the point. You're not behaving like a human. You're doing things that humans might find, more than morally questionable. But morals are an aspect of modern religion. We tend to think of religion as something that is moral by definition, but that's modern religion. Modern Western religion, monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Very rule-bound, very much, like, certainly Judaism is very much about a covenant between them and a particular God, and there's a certain rules of ethics and behavior that go along with that. The Romans were kind of like that too. They had like 8 million rules for everything, even before these other religious systems came in. I always felt like this is why Christianity ended up becoming a thing, because it was like that the blend of the rule-bound people. They're like, hey, we love this. This is full of rules. This is a great religion for the empire. Okay, it's great religion for because it espouses a worldview that is beneficial to the emperor. We're very, very focused on rules, and when anybody talks about religion or speaks against religion, they're doing it in a social way. It's always about, like, well, look at the Inquisition, look at this, look at that, yes, absolutely, but there's more to it than that. There's way more to it than that. Way more to it than the social. Maybe the social contracts and the rituals and things. There's way more to it than that. It's not just about the social. But the institutions tend to only focus on the social, because at least in monotheism, they believe that the elements that are more, I don't know, that might be more connected to that Eastern way of thinking in their own way, and they do actually exist in Western religion, but those are only for special people. They're not like for regular non-clergy people. Okay? So it's interesting. It's interesting the way in which we separate things, but also in the way in which humanism privileges the human mind and what we see in our perceptions. We're just such clever people, but it's like, yeah, but in a system where everything is play, you kind of get turned around and around in that one. It's like you're just going to be on that samsara wheel. Like, you're not gonna wake up to the fact, wait a minute, this is kind of, the Arisians may have had it right. This might be a cosmic joke. Anyway, some thoughts on Shakti. I hope you enjoyed this today. I'm already at almost 20 past 1, so I could continue on one of my rambles, but really glad to have all of you joining me. Seems like I have quite a lot of you joining me today. Some of you a little bit towards the end. Obviously, the recording of this is going to be available, as always, and I will post it to the Chthonia channel. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hope you found this somewhat interesting. May or may not be enlightening to you, but hopefully at least interesting. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next week.